Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Star Wars The Force Awakens. So this is going to be a full-on spoiler review. I cannot stress this enough. If you have not seen The Force Awakens, under no circumstances do you want to watch this video, as everything will be spoiled. This also includes the comments section. Since this video will contain spoilers, I will also allow spoilers in the comments section. So if you haven't seen The Force Awakens, don't read the comments section, don't watch this video, just leave right now and come back once you have seen this movie. You have been warned. If you want to hear my thoughts and expectations of what they were prior to seeing the film, you can watch the video I did for that. I'll put a link in the description below for that video. So let me start this video by describing the plot of Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And I just want to emphasize again that this will contain spoilers. So, The Force Awakens is a movie that begins with a struggle between an oppressive fascist regime and an army fighting for freedom and democracy. The forces fighting for democracy find devastating plans that will strike a blow against the fascists. Therefore, the fascists are highly motivated to retrieve these plans. So the movie begins with a struggle as the fascist forces overwhelm our good guys and capture the hero. The evil forces are led by a tall, dark man wearing a spooky mask who talks in a weird voice that's somewhat muffled by the mask. The main villain takes our hero prisoner. However, before the hero is captured, that person gives the plans to a droid and then sends that droid off on a desert planet. The droid roams the desert planet until meeting a lonely person who seems to be just an average, ordinary young person, but as we'll soon discover, this person is very strong with the ways of the Force and possibly is the offspring of the Jedi Master who featured prominently in the previous trilogy. But that's something we'll find out more about in the second film. Anyway, this person gets the droid and soon learns it is vital for the army fighting for democracy. However, the ordinary person refuses the call to adventure, wanting to remain at home. However, after an attack by the fascist forces that track down the droid, the hero decides to take up the call of trying to take the droid back to the base of the good guys so they can use the plans that the droid has to defeat the bad guys. The heroes team up with a mentor character, a character who was prominent in the previous installments, but not necessarily the main character. He tells them about a time that only seemed like legends to these younger heroes and tells them about the power of the Force. Meanwhile, the evil army unveil a devastating weapon, a giant spear that's capable of destroying worlds, which they use in a demonstration of power to destroy a planet full of innocent people. However, halfway through the movie, one of our hero characters decides to give up and not help in the fight anymore, but then makes a surprising return and decides to fight for good. However, our heroes return the droid to the army of democracy and they find a weakness in the world-destroying station, so they stage an attack with small fighters to exploit this weakness, which leads to an epic space battle where our heroes are severely outnumbered, while the evil army learns of where the hero base is and targets it with its world-destroying weapon. So our heroes have a limited amount of time to destroy this weapon before their base is destroyed. But also our heroes infiltrate the enemy base to rescue a captured friend. During the course of the rescue, the mentor character encounters the big evil masked man whom they have a history together, as they have in the past had a more loving relationship. However, the masked villain kills the mentor character, leaving our heroes quite distraught. The main hero of the film then defeats the masked villain in battle, but doesn't kill him, leaving him free to return to the other movies in the trilogy. And the space battle to destroy the planet-killing station is successful, and they manage to blow it up mere seconds before it was about to destroy their base. Our heroes then return to base where they are celebrated as heroes, and our heroes form a bond that wasn't there before, leading them to become good friends. And that is the plot of Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Now, I know someone inevitably is going to comment saying I'm, stretching it or exaggerating to make The Force Awakens sound more like A New Hope. I know it's inevitable, it's also utterly ridiculous. Sure, every once in a while I had to use vague terminology, but the similarities are glaring! I don't have to use my imagination or stretch anything to find connections that aren't there, as the similarities are blatantly obvious to anyone who is unbiased. Some similarities are more glaring than others, but I'll get more into that soon. However, if you think my summary of the plot means I don't like The Force Awakens, then you're mistaken. I really enjoyed The Force Awakens. In fact, I will make a statement that may seem controversial, but I like The Force Awakens better than A New Hope, which may sound like a really bold statement until you take into account my feelings on the original Star Wars film, sometimes referred to as A New Hope, and that is I don't actually care for it as much and think that it's highly overrated. It has always been my least favorite of the original trilogy, as I think it too closely resembles a cheesy 1940s or 50s serial, and it has a tone of melodrama that is highly dated. And many touches where I can't tell that the studio interfered to make it more Hollywood-like, and at times it can move too slowly and lose my interest. So take that into consideration. It's not so outrageous for me to say I prefer The Force Awakens because, that's not a high bar in my mind, as I prefer many movies over The New Hope. Even when I take into account that The Force Awakens blatantly steals from A New Hope in terms of plot, I do find it has enough originality in it to not come off as a cheap copy, and it has a faster pace, more interesting characters without some of the cheesy melodrama present in the first one. But it is obvious in many ways, not just the plot similarities, that J.J. Abrams was trying a tad too hard to make it like the originals, to the point where at times, it felt like he was too afraid to go his own way, and sometimes it hampered him. Not always. This movie does contain elements that are truly unique. However, I personally believe it would have been better off had it tried a little less to be like the original trilogy. It should honor the original material for sure, something the prequel trilogy failed to do, but honoring it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be exactly like it and follow the same structure. Like, it just feels to me that this movie is trying too hard to be a by-the-numbers Star Wars movie, like someone studied a pie chart about what a Star Wars movie should be like, rather than just trying to tell a good story. But when it comes down to it, the only similarity that really bothered me, that I felt was really forced and didn't work, was the new Death Star thingy, or whatever the hell they called it. It destroys the whole solar system now. It's totally not the Death Star, except that it is. I mean, the whole storyline felt really tacked on, like they just threw it in there to create these fake stakes, and it was way too much like the first Star Wars movie. In fact, Star Wars has already redone the Death Star in Return of the Jedi. Doing it again was just too much. And I don't care what anyone says, this is another Death Star, and it's just tired. They need to try something new. I mean, it may not work, but at least it won't be a lazy rehash, which this most certainly was. Another issue I had with this movie is that it felt a bit rushed. I mean, it was great, it didn't drag on like A New Hope did, but it tried to cram too much into one movie, and at times, this served to disconnect me to what was going on. As I'm about to get into shortly, I felt that for the most part, the characters were done really well and really well developed. However, not always. Sometimes things did seem to be a little rushed due to the film trying to cram too much into one film. For example, the friendships between Finn and Poe and Finn and Rey felt a bit forced. It wasn't entirely believable. It was like they just met, then all of a sudden they're best friends. Likewise, Han Solo as a mentor character wasn't sold quite as well as Obi-Wan was in the first film. And I overall didn't care for the character of Poe Dameron. He seemed just like a generic fighter pilot, his only personality or character trait being that he's a good pilot, and that's all there seemed to be to him. Also, I think they went a bit overboard with Rey's abilities. I think it's pretty obvious she's Luke Skywalker's daughter. I mean, I suppose it's possible that's just what they want us to think and it's misdirection, but either way, she does have some special connection to the Force, and I think they overplayed it a bit. Yes, I get it, she's special, but come on. She did that Jedi mind trick without anyone having her tell her how to do it. Obi-Wan had to tell Luke what it was, and he had no idea. And even then, it wasn't until years after training that he learned how to do it. And then she defeated Kylo Ren in a lightsaber battle, when obviously Kylo Ren had been training for years, and this was the first time she had ever used a lightsaber. So yeah, any cries of her being special or the one or powerful with the Force or whatever is still no excuse in my eyes for the abilities she displayed, which I feel were just way too much. Also, the other major problem I had with this movie was the fact that it didn't really explain much of what was going on. I mean, my understanding was that the First Order was a political, militaristic movement, kind of like the Nazi Party, that was trying to take over the galaxy and replace the New Republic, and the Resistance was fighting them and fighting for the New Republic. So, here's my question. If the New Republic is the dominant government in that part of the galaxy and the Resistance represents them, why is it called the Resistance? What are they resisting? Shouldn't they be called the Army of the Republic or something? Wouldn't, technically speaking, the First Order be the Resistance, since they're the ones resisting the dominant government, which is the New Republic? You know, I'm sure someone who's read the novels or comic books that are canon will correct me and tell me I misunderstood the political situation, which is fine, I probably did, except for the fact that I misunderstood it because it wasn't freaking explained in the movie. And I'm sorry, but I shouldn't have to read a freaking comic book or watch a fucking cartoon to understand the simple political situations that should have been explained in the freaking movie itself. I know someone will argue, well, if they explain too much, then it will be like the prequels with a lot of boring talking scenes in the Senate. I'm sorry, but that is a false dichotomy argument. It falsely assumes you either have to not explain it at all or be like the prequels, like those are the only two options, which is total BS. There's actually a happy medium one could strike by making it clear without overdoing it like the prequels did. In fact, that's one of the film's major flaws, in my opinion, was that it tried too hard not to be like the prequels, that sometimes it actually led to more flaws. So now, let me talk about the ending. Every critic I watched so far has said that a lot of people will complain about the cliffhanger ending or the fact that a lot of things were left open. But the funny thing is, I haven't heard anyone complain about it yet. Every critic I've seen actually defended it and said that they loved it. So let me be the first to say I hated the ending. It was too open-ended. Of course, the go-to counter argument to this is, ooh, Empire Strikes Back, Empire Strikes Back. In fact, I heard one critic even go as far to give Empire as an example of an open-ended movie and then give the prequels as examples of movies that had endings that explained everything. First off, that is factually not true. Attack of the Clones was just as open-ended as Empire, if not more so, and both The Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith were far more open-ended than either A New Hope or The Return of the Jedi. Revenge of the Sith may not have seemed like a cliffhanger to someone who's seen the original trilogy, which was pretty much everyone who watched the movie, but to someone who hasn't seen the original trilogy before watching Revenge of the Sith, it was a total cliffhanger ending. But anyway, just because Empire's cliffhanger ending was good doesn't mean that The Force Awakens cliffhanger was good as well. There's a right way and a wrong way to do a cliffhanger, and this was a wrong way. Ending right when they met Luke, I'm sorry, but that is a bitch move. If I were to do a top 10 or something like that of movies that ended at a very bad spot and left too much open, it would probably go something like The Desolation of Smaug would by far be number one. How that's by far the worst. I mean, that was just fucking ridiculous. They might as well just cut him off mid-sentence. Second would be the Hunger Games catching fire. That was pretty abrupt. Third would be The Matrix Reloaded, and just slightly behind that would be The Force Awakens. So I'd say it's the fourth worst movie that ended at a very bad spot, but that's just my opinion. But the next thing is more of a criticism of the marketing department than the movie itself, but that is that Luke Skywalker was in the movie for like 5 seconds. You know, in and on itself, I have no problem with this, except for the fact that they have Mark Hamill's name on the credits as one of the stars of the movie. He was in all sorts of interviews and shit, and they were acting like he was a big star. He's in the movie for 5 seconds! In fact, I think it would have been much better had they not even mentioned Mark Hamill at all. I mean, sure, it would have leaked by, you know, some fanboys or whatever, but still, keep it on the down low. I would have found that ending much more satisfying. Instead, I was expecting to see him throughout the whole movie because his name is right freaking there on the poster. And so I was massively disappointed when he was only in the movie for like 5 seconds. That was very bad marketing. So, now that I spent enough time talking about what I didn't like about the movie, let me talk about what I did like about it. As I alluded to earlier, I actually really enjoyed this film and overall think it's a great movie, and I had a lot of fun with it. I just try not to let that enjoyment blind me to the flaws, so I needed to get this out of the way. But now let me talk about what I did like about this film, and the first thing I have to mention is the villain, Kylo Ren. Bravo! Bravo! I gotta say, I was a bit worried about the villain because J.J. Abrams doesn't have a good track record with villains. They tend to be two-dimensional and stereotypical like Nero in Star Trek 2009. But Kylo Ren was a great villain. He was a highly developed character who you understood his motivations and even sympathized with him a bit, and yet he was still scary as hell and a huge obstacle for our heroes. I was super impressed with him. In fact, I might go as far to say that he is one of the best movie villains ever. It was super interesting that he turned out to be Han Solo's and Leia's son. That just makes him so much more interesting, and I love how they didn't really make, you know, that too big a deal out of the reveal, and it kind of just calmly dropped it. Also, I really like that Kylo Ren survived until the next movie, because that was a major problem with the prequels, that they would introduce a new villain in each movie and then promptly kill them you know, off before they could be fully developed. They didn't have an overarching villain who survived in all 3 movies. And no, the Emperor doesn't count. He's more of a puppeteer type villain. I'm talking like a Darth Vader hands-on villain, so it's great that they kept Kylo Ren around so he can come back in the sequels. The Supreme Leader Snoke character was really interesting. He did give off a really strong Emperor vibe. However, I love how they didn't really explain him in this movie and left that open-ended. I didn't think everything needed to be explained, and I can see why they would leave some things to the sequels, and I thought this was a good choice. It left me really intrigued. And while we're on the subject of villains, I find that most reviewers are complaining about Gwendolyn Christie's Captain Phasma, but I didn't have a problem with her at all. She was like the typical bad guy sergeant, like a low-ranking villain, but still ranked higher than all the wee little minions. And she worked really well in that role, so I thought she was fine. I think people just had too high of expectations because, well, as Gwendolyn Christie, and she's awesome on Game of Thrones, and the Chrome Trooper looked really cool, so I think people just let their expectations get the better of them. I thought she was fine. I liked the rest of the characters. Like Rey was super interesting, and so was Finn for that matter. They did a really great job of introducing these characters and getting you to care about them. After 3 prequel movies, I'm not sure how much I actually cared about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I certainly didn't care about people like Mace Windu at all. But after just a half hour of this movie, I absolutely loved Rey and Finn and desperately wanted to see more of them. That being said, as I mentioned before, some of their relationships I didn't quite buy because it was a bit too rushed, but overall I loved them as characters. Han Solo and Chewie were great in this movie. They didn't seem too ham-fisted or forced. They just fit right into the plot and helped enhance the new characters. It was just so brilliant. Han Solo appeared a lot more in this movie than I thought he would, but I guess that's tempered by the fact that he won't be in the sequels. I loved Leia in this film. I totally bought her character. It didn't matter that she was a main character in the original trilogy. She would have worked just as well had you had no idea who this was, as she just worked as the typical resistance general, and it worked. It would work better either way. I thought it was a perfect role for her. And I have to mention the BB-8. I fucking loved BB-8. I think BB-8 is my favorite Star Wars droid ever. I wasn't ever, that huge of a fan of R2-D2 or C-3PO, so I was really skeptical about BB-8, but I loved her. She wasn't as sassy as R2-D2 or as annoying as C-3PO. She was kind of just cute and an endearing droid, and the fact that they got you to care about a little rolling ball thingy was very impressive. In fact, when R2-D2 woke up towards the end of the film and started doing his thing, I was like, you know what, R2? I hate to tell you this, but I don't really care about you anymore. I want more BB-8. BB-8 is awesome. And that's the other major thing I have to talk about, and something every critic is talking about, so I'm going to repeat myself. I'm going to repeat what they're saying, but I think it's worth saying that this movie is the funniest Star Wars movie. Not that it's a comedy, but it did the best job out of any Star Wars films of binding the comedy into a serious drama and action and making it seamless. It was so impressive. The prequels were awful at this, as the comedy was very clunky, not at all funny, and stood out like a sore thumb, whereas the comedy here was perfection. It was within the character stories and helped enhance the characters and make you care about them more, and totally not out of place. Pretty damn funny, so bravo to that. The action sequences were also really good as well. This is another thing I was worried about with Abrams because of the Star Trek movies. The action sequences were just a blur of CGI that overloaded the senses, but the action sequences here were amazing. They were straightforward, easy to follow, but also really exciting and totally enhanced the overall story like any great action sequence should. I never felt bored or like the action was just there to be there. Every action set piece served a purpose and enhanced the story, whether it had been Finn's journey to leave the dark side for the light, or Rey's journey to discover her true abilities. It was all great. And that's the thing, there was never a dull moment in this film. Sure, sometimes it moved a bit too fast and felt a bit rushed, but it was never boring. I was always engaged, I always had a blast, and yes, it left me wanting more. When the movie ended, I was ready for the next one, so this film totally did its job. So despite my complaints at the start of the video, I really enjoyed this movie. So my rating for Star Wars The Force Awakens out of 10 is an 8, extremely good. This was a really fun movie where the action was pulled off really well, the comedy blended seamlessly into the film, and got me heavily invested and engaged with the characters to the point I really cared about what happened to them. But at the same time, it tried too hard to be like the original trilogy, and it was too obvious. It tried to pack too much into one film to the point of it being rushed, which did hamper my enjoyment of the film somewhat, but overall it was a quality film, definitely worth watching. So that's it for my review of Star Wars The Force Awakens. Be sure to check out my channel for other movie reviews, as well as I do videos on Game of Thrones, Star Trek, and I'm starting a weekly TV episode review in the new year for many TV shows like The X-Files, The Walking Dead, Vikings, and more. So make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.